I stood outside the iron gates of my own wedding venue, watching as my mother opened them wide for my sister instead. Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I'm 34 years old. My wedding day started with me locked outside the venue gates at 9 in the morning. I'd arrived early to check on the flower arrangements, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, planning to change later. The estate had massive iron gates at the entrance, always kept locked for privacy. My mother had the code, and she'd promised to meet me there. I rang the bell 3 times, checked my phone, and waited. Through the bars, I could see the garden where I'd be married in 6 hours. Finally, I saw movement near the main house. My mother appeared on the stone pathway, walking quickly but not toward me. She was heading to the side entrance, the one near the bridal suite. I called out to her, waving my arms, but she didn't turn around. Then I saw my sister Emily behind her, carrying what looked like a garment bag. A white garment bag. My dress was already inside, hanging in the bridal suite since yesterday. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I pushed it away. I called my mother's cell phone. It rang 4 times before she answered, and I could hear echoing sounds in the background. She was inside the building. I told her I was at the front gate and needed her to let me in. She said she was busy right now. Could I wait 15 minutes? Maybe 20. I asked her what was more important than letting me into my own wedding venue. She said Emily needed help with something, and her voice had that edge it always got when she didn't want to be questioned. 20 minutes passed. I sat on the stone wall beside the gate, feeling ridiculous and angry. A delivery truck pulled up behind my car, and the driver asked if I knew how to get inside. I told him I was the bride and I was locked out. He laughed, thinking I was joking. When he realized I wasn't, his face changed to something like pity. He called the venue's main office, and someone came to let him through. They opened the gate for his flower delivery, but told me I had to wait for my mother. When Mom finally appeared at the gate, she wasn't alone. Emily walked beside her, now wearing a white dress. Not my dress, but similar. Simpler, maybe, but definitely a wedding dress. Mom opened the gate and they both walked past me without stopping. Emily glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Mom said they needed to check something with the ceremony setup. I grabbed my mother's arm and asked what was happening. She pulled away and told me not to make a scene in front of the staff. I followed them inside, my heart pounding. We walked through the garden, past workers setting up chairs, toward the altar area. Emily stood where I was supposed to stand in a few hours. The photographer was there, adjusting his camera. Mom was directing him, telling him to get a few test shots. She said something about checking the lighting. Emily looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I asked again what they were doing, louder this time. My mother turned to me with that patient expression she used when she thought I was being difficult. She explained that she'd been worried about the ceremony timing, about whether the lighting would work for photos. So she'd asked Emily to come early and stand in for a test run. Emily had driven 2 hours to get here by 8. I asked why they hadn't told me, why I'd been locked outside. Mom said she didn't want to bother me with details, that I should be relaxing before the big day. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Emily had always done whatever Mom asked, always been the good daughter who stayed close to home. I'd moved away for college and never came back, built a life 3 hours north. Mom had never forgiven me for that distance, never stopped reminding me that Emily was the one who cared about family. Now, Emily stood in a wedding dress in my place, and I didn't know if she'd chosen this or if Mom had orchestrated the whole thing. Emily finally spoke. She said Mom had called her yesterday evening, said there was a problem with the ceremony rehearsal since I'd canceled it. Mom had asked her to come early and walk through the ceremony so the staff would know what to do. Emily had borrowed a dress from a friend, thinking it was just a technical rehearsal. But looking at Mom's face, at how satisfied she seemed, I wondered if that was the whole truth. Emily's eyes were asking me something, maybe forgiveness. I asked the photographer to stop taking pictures. He looked at my mother, then at me, unsure who was in charge. I told him I was the bride, today was my wedding, and I wanted him to stop. He lowered his camera. Mom started to protest, saying we'd paid for his time and she was just being efficient. I said I didn't care about efficiency. I cared about why my sister was wearing a wedding dress on my wedding day, and why no one had thought to tell me. David arrived then, walking across the lawn toward us. He was supposed to be getting ready at his brother's house, but someone must have called him. He took in the scene, Emily in the white dress, me in my jeans, my mother's defensive posture. He asked if everything was okay, and I realized I didn't know how to answer. Nothing was okay, but I didn't want to start my wedding day with a fight. I could feel every choice ahead of me narrowing down. Mom said she'd just been trying to help, that she knew I was stressed about getting everything perfect. But I hadn't been stressed, not until this moment. I'd been excited, happy, ready. She was the one who'd been calling me for weeks with worries about the schedule, the seating arrangements, whether David's family would like the menu. I'd handled every concern calmly, but now I understood she wasn't worried about the wedding. She was worried about not being needed, not being central. Emily took off the borrowed dress right there, just pulled it over her head in her slip. She handed it to my mother and said she was sorry, that she should have called me first. She looked smaller suddenly, standing there in her underwear in front of everyone, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. I grabbed my jacket from my car and gave it to her. She wrapped it around herself and we walked back toward the building together, leaving Mom standing alone with the white dress. In the bridal suite, Emily got dressed in her regular clothes. She told me she'd suspected something was off when Mom insisted she bring a white dress, but she'd convinced herself it was just Mom being Mom. She said she was tired of always being the good daughter, the one who accommodated everything. I told her I understood, that I'd been angry, but I wasn't anymore. We'd both been trying to manage Mom in our own ways, and neither approach had saved us from moments like this. David found us there and asked what I wanted to do. We could postpone. We could start over. We could go ahead as planned. I thought about all the guests who'd be arriving soon, about the months of planning, about the marriage I wanted to start. I told him I wanted to get married today, right on schedule. But I wanted Emily as my maid of honor, standing beside me. She hadn't been in the original ceremony, but I wanted her there now. She started crying and said yes. When we came out, Mom was sitting in the garden looking at her phone. I sat beside her and told her the ceremony would go forward as planned, except Emily would be standing with me. Mom said that wasn't what we'd practiced, that it would throw off the whole balance. I said there hadn't been a practice, there'd been a performance I wasn't invited to. I told her she could participate in my wedding as a guest, or she could leave. Her choice. She stayed. During the ceremony, I saw her in the third row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I didn't know if she was crying from emotion or frustration. Emily stood beside me, solid and present, and when I looked at her, I felt something shift between us. We were sisters first, daughters second. Maybe we'd always been that way, but today, it felt true. David's vows made me cry, and when I said mine, I meant every word about choosing each other, about building something new. At the reception, Mom tried to give a speech she hadn't been scheduled to give. She stood up with her glass raised and started talking about how she'd always known I'd find someone special, how she'd helped plan every detail of this perfect day. The coordinator looked at me, waiting for a signal. I shook my head gently, and the coordinator stepped forward, thanking Mom for her toast and moving on to the next speaker. Mom sat down hard, her face red. Later, Emily and I stood outside in the cool evening air. She said she was thinking about moving away, maybe to the city where I lived. She was tired of being in Mom's orbit, tired of being used as the good daughter to make me feel like the bad one. I told her my guest room was available anytime she wanted to visit, to test it out. We clinked our champagne glasses together, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had my sister back. The gates had opened, just not for the person Mom intended. The honeymoon in Maine was exactly what we needed. David and I spent a week in a small coastal cottage, walking on beaches, eating lobster rolls, not checking our phones. I'd turned off notifications from my family group chat before we even left the reception. David asked me twice if I was sure, if I'd regret not staying connected. I told him I needed the distance, needed to start our marriage without my mother's voice in my head. He understood, or at least he tried to. On our last day, I finally opened my messages. There were 43 from my mother, ranging from cheerful to concerned to accusatory. The first few thanked me for a beautiful wedding. Then they shifted to asking why I wasn't responding, whether I was angry. By the end, she was saying I'd embarrassed her in front of family, that people had asked why Emily was suddenly in the ceremony. I showed David the messages, and he winced. He said we'd handle it together. Emily had texted too, but only 3 messages. The first said congratulations again. The second, sent 2 days later, said she'd started looking at apartments in my city. The third, from yesterday, asked if we could have coffee when I got back. No pressure, just whenever I had time. I felt that familiar pull of sisterly affection mixed with worry. Emily had talked about leaving before, but she'd never actually done it. Mom always found a way to make her stay. We drove home on Sunday afternoon, and I felt my stomach tighten as we got closer. Mom lived 40 minutes away, close enough to drop by unannounced, which she'd done more times than I could count. David's hand found mine on the console. He said we should establish some boundaries now, before things got worse. I agreed, but I didn't know how to enforce boundaries with someone who'd spent my whole life ignoring them. Mom had a key to our apartment. The first thing I did when we got inside was text Mom asking for my key back. I worded it carefully, said we wanted to keep just one spare with David's brother in case of emergencies. She responded immediately, asking why I didn't trust her. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, Mom called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. On the third call, David gently took the phone from my hand and turned it off completely. The relief I felt surprised me. Emily came over Tuesday evening. She looked different somehow, lighter maybe, or just less tired. We sat in my kitchen drinking tea while David gave us space by working in the bedroom. Emily told me she'd put down a deposit on an apartment, a studio 20 minutes from where I lived. She'd given notice at her job and told Mom yesterday. I asked how Mom had taken it. Emily's expression shifted to something between amusement and exhaustion. Apparently, Mom had cried. I asked if she was sure about the move, if she was ready for the fallout. Emily said she'd been ready for years but hadn't realized it until the wedding. Seeing Mom orchestrate that whole scene with the dress, watching me finally stand up to her, something had clicked. Emily said she'd always thought being the good daughter meant staying close, being available. Now she wondered if it just meant being controlled. She looked at me across the table, suddenly seeming older, wiser. We talked for 2 hours about everything Mom had done over the years. The small manipulations, the guilt trips, the way she played us against each other. Emily told me about times Mom had said I didn't care about the family, that I'd chosen my career over them. I told her about times Mom had said Emily was weak, too dependent. We'd both been hearing these comparisons our whole lives, never realizing Mom was shaping narratives that kept us apart. It felt good to finally compare notes. David emerged around 9 and offered to order pizza. While we waited for delivery, Emily showed me photos of her new apartment. It was small, but had good light, hardwood floors, a tiny balcony. She seemed excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. She asked if I thought Mom would ever forgive her for leaving. I told her the truth. Mom would either adjust or she wouldn't, but that wasn't Emily's responsibility. Emily nodded like she'd needed someone to say it out loud. After Emily left, David asked me how I was feeling about everything. I told him I was proud of my sister but worried about what came next. Mom wouldn't just accept 2 daughters who'd established boundaries. She'd push back, test those boundaries, try to find cracks. David said we'd handle whatever came, together. I believed him, but I also knew he couldn't fully understand what it was like to have a mother who loved you but needed to control you. Mom showed up unannounced Friday morning. I was working from home in the middle of a video call when I heard her key in the lock, except her key didn't work anymore. David had changed the locks while I was at work yesterday. I heard her trying the key multiple times, then knocking, then calling my name. I muted my video call and sat very still, heart pounding. Mom knocked harder. I stayed quiet until she finally left. My hands were shaking. She texted immediately, I came by to bring you leftover wedding cake. Why doesn't my key work? I didn't respond until my meeting ended. Then I wrote back saying we'd changed the locks for security reasons, that I'd asked her to return the old key anyway. She called. I didn't answer. She called David. He declined the call and texted her that we'd see her soon but needed space. She responded, "Space from your own mother? I raised you better than this, Rebecca." That weekend, my aunt called. She was my mother's sister, and they talked every day. Aunt Linda wanted to know what was going on, why I was freezing out my mother, why Emily was moving away. She said Mom was heartbroken, that she'd only been trying to help with the wedding. I felt my carefully maintained calm start to crack. I told Aunt Linda about being locked outside the venue, about finding Emily in a wedding dress. There was silence. Then she said maybe I was remembering it wrong. I realized then that Mom had already spun her version of events to the extended family. In her story, she'd been the efficient planner, Emily had been the helpful sister, and I'd been the ungrateful bride. Aunt Linda had only heard one side. I could either spend energy correcting the narrative, or I could let it go. I chose to let it go. I told Aunt Linda I loved her but needed to focus on my marriage now. She said she understood, but her voice said otherwise. David and I had dinner with his parents that Sunday. They asked about the wedding, and I gave them the short version. Beautiful ceremony, great reception, some family complications. David's mom, Janet, studied my face and asked if I was okay. Something about her genuine concern made my throat tight. I said I was dealing with boundary issues with my mother. Janet nodded knowingly. She said every marriage required renegotiation of family relationships. I wanted to believe her, but my situation felt different, more complicated. Emily moved into her apartment the following Saturday. David and I helped her carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs. She didn't have much furniture yet, just a mattress and some basics. Mom hadn't offered to help with the move. According to Emily, Mom was still barely speaking to her, communicating mostly through hurt sighs and short texts. Emily seemed okay with it, or at least she was pretending to be. We ordered Chinese food and ate sitting on her empty floor, and she looked genuinely relaxed. After we left Emily's place, David asked if I thought Mom would come around eventually. I said I didn't know, that she might double down on feeling victimized. Some part of me still hoped she'd reflect on her behavior, apologize, try to rebuild differently, but I was learning not to wait for that hope to materialize. I needed to build my life based on what was, not what I wished for. It was harder than it sounded, but necessary. That night, I dreamed about the wedding gates. In the dream, I was on the outside again. But this time I wasn't trying to get in. I was walking away, and the gates were getting smaller behind me. Emily was walking beside me, and we were heading toward somewhere new. When I woke up, David was already awake, reading. I told him about the dream. He said it sounded like a good one, like my brain was processing. I thought he might be right about that. Mom sent a long email Wednesday morning. It was the kind of message she specialized in, starting with "I love you" and ending with a list of everything I'd done wrong. She said she'd only ever wanted the best for me, that she'd sacrificed so much, that both her daughters were now shutting her out. She said Emily's move was my fault, that I'd poisoned her against family. She said if I didn't want her in my life, she'd respect that. But I should know how much I was hurting her. I read the email 3 times, feeling different things each time. Guilt, anger, sadness, frustration. I showed it to David, and he said I didn't have to respond right away. But I wanted to. I wanted to tell her that love shouldn't come with so many conditions. I drafted a response, deleted it, drafted another. Finally, I wrote something simple. I love you too, Mom. I need you to respect my decisions and my marriage. I'm not shutting you out, but I need space. I hope you can understand. Her response came within minutes. I guess I'll just have to learn to live with having distant daughters. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The autumn air was cool, and the trees were turning orange and yellow. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to manage my mother's emotions, trying to be enough. I thought about Emily doing the same thing in a different way. We'd both been so busy managing her that we'd forgotten to ask what we needed, what would make us happy. Thanksgiving was 6 weeks away, and I knew we'd have to address it eventually. David's family always did a big dinner at his parents' house, warm and chaotic with his 3 siblings and their kids. My family had always been smaller, quieter. Just Mom, Emily, and me since Dad died when I was 12. This year felt different, complicated in ways previous years hadn't been. I mentioned it to David over breakfast one morning, testing the waters. He looked up from his coffee and asked what I wanted to do. I told him I didn't know yet. Part of me wanted to skip the whole holiday, fly somewhere warm and pretend November didn't exist. But that felt like running away, and I'd spent enough of my life running from difficult conversations with my mother. Emily texted me that afternoon asking the same question. What was I doing for Thanksgiving? I could feel both of us circling the same problem, neither wanting to be the first to bring up Mom. Finally, I just asked her directly if Mom had mentioned the holiday. Emily said Mom hadn't brought it up, which was unusual. Normally, by October, Mom had already planned the menu and assigned everyone dishes to bring. The silence felt deliberate, like Mom was waiting for one of us to reach out first. Emily said she'd been thinking about doing Thanksgiving at her new apartment, just the 2 of us and our partners. It was a small space, but we could make it work. The idea felt both rebellious and sad. I'd never had Thanksgiving without my mother before. I told Emily I'd think about it and talk to David. That night, I brought it up while we were doing dishes. He said his mom had already invited us, that it was a standing invitation every year. I could go there, have an easy, drama-free holiday with his family, but something about that felt wrong too. Like I was choosing sides or abandoning my own family entirely. David dried a plate slowly, waiting for me to work through my thoughts out loud. What I really wanted, I realized, was for my mother to apologize. Not a vague, "I'm sorry you felt hurt," but a real acknowledgement of what she'd done at the wedding, of the years of comparison and control. I wanted her to see Emily and me as separate people with our own lives, not extensions of herself. David nodded, but didn't say anything. He knew as well as I did that I might be waiting a long time for that apology. Some people never learn to say sorry. Emily called me Sunday evening sounding upset. Mom had finally reached out about Thanksgiving, but not to invite her. Instead, Mom had told Emily she was planning to spend the holiday alone this year since both her daughters were too busy with their new lives to care about her. Emily felt terrible, caught between guilt and anger. I asked if Mom had actually invited her to anything, or if this was just an announcement designed to make Emily feel bad. Emily admitted it was the latter. I recognized the pattern immediately. Mom was playing the martyr, hoping one of us would rush in to fix it, to prove we still cared. It was the same strategy she'd used when I'd moved away for college, when Emily had briefly dated someone Mom didn't approve of, when I'd chosen to work on Christmas Eve one year. The emotional manipulation was so familiar it almost felt comfortable. Almost. But this time, I was determined not to fall for it. I told Emily we should stick with the original plan. Emily asked if I really thought we should let Mom spend Thanksgiving alone. I heard the guilt in her voice, the same guilt I was feeling, but I also heard something else. Exhaustion. We were both tired of being responsible for our mother's happiness. I reminded Emily that Mom was choosing to be alone, that we'd tried to set reasonable boundaries, and she'd responded with silence and guilt trips. Emily sighed and said I was right, but it didn't make it easier. Nothing about this was easy. David suggested we invite Mom to Emily's Thanksgiving, extend an olive branch without compromising our boundaries. It was a good idea in theory, but I wasn't sure Mom would accept. I talked to Emily about it, and she agreed to send the invitation. Emily texted Mom the next day. "Rebecca, David, James, and I are doing Thanksgiving at my place. You're welcome to join us. Dinner at 3. Mom's response came hours later. "I wouldn't want to impose on your new life." Emily showed me the message, frustrated. I decided to call Mom directly. The phone rang 4 times, and I almost hung up before she answered. Her voice was cool, distant, the tone she used when she wanted me to know I'd done something wrong. I told her we'd love to have her for Thanksgiving, that Emily's apartment was small, but we'd make it work. She asked why we couldn't do it at her house like always. I explained that Emily wanted to host, that it was important to her. Mom was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she'd think about it, which I knew meant no. She asked how I was, and I said I was good, that work was busy, and David and I were settling into married life. She made a small sound, not quite disapproval, but close. She asked if I was happy with my choices, with how everything had turned out. The question felt loaded, dangerous. I said yes, I was happy. She said that was all that mattered then, in a tone that suggested the opposite. We ended the call awkwardly. Emily texted me later asking how it went. I told her Mom probably wouldn't come, but at least we'd tried. Emily sent back a shrugging emoji, which felt like progress. A month ago, Emily would have been devastated. Now she seemed to be accepting that we couldn't control Mom's reactions, only our own actions. I felt proud of her growth, and maybe a little proud of my own too. We were learning to let go of responsibility that was never ours to carry. David's mom called me the following week. Janet said she'd heard we might not be coming to their Thanksgiving, that David had mentioned we were navigating something complicated with my family. She wanted me to know we were welcome either way. No pressure. Her kindness made my eyes sting. I thanked her and said we'd probably split the day, maybe do lunch with my sister and dinner with them. Janet said that sounded perfect, to just let her know numbers. The week before Thanksgiving, Mom called Emily. I wasn't there, but Emily told me about it afterward. Mom had said she was planning to volunteer at a shelter on Thanksgiving, serving meals to people who had nowhere else to go. The implication was clear. She was grouping herself with people who'd been abandoned, forgotten. Emily had stayed calm, said that sounded like a nice way to spend the day. Mom had seemed surprised by Emily's reaction, like she'd expected guilt or an immediate invitation to change her plans. I asked Emily how she felt about it. She said she felt sad but also relieved, like maybe this was Mom's way of giving herself an out. If Mom was volunteering, she could tell people she'd chosen to spend Thanksgiving helping others. Not that her daughters hadn't invited her. It let everyone save face. Emily wondered if maybe Mom needed that narrative, needed to be the noble one. It was more generous than I felt capable of being, but I admired Emily's perspective on it. Thanksgiving morning, Emily and I cooked together in her tiny kitchen. David and James, Emily's boyfriend, were banished to the living room to watch football. We made turkey breast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and pumpkin pie. Nothing fancy, but it smelled like home. Emily kept checking her phone, and I knew she was hoping Mom might text, might show up, might choose connection over pride. I was hoping for it too, even though I knew it was unlikely. Hope is hard to kill completely, even when you know better. Mom didn't text. We ate around 3, the 4 of us crowded around Emily's small table. James said grace, thanking God for new beginnings and chosen family. Emily's eyes got wet and she squeezed his hand. David squeezed mine under the table. The food was good, the conversation easy. We talked about Emily's new job search, about David's upcoming work trip, about nothing heavy or complicated. It felt like breathing after holding your breath for too long. This was what family could be without tension. After dinner, David and I drove to his parents' house for dessert. His family was loud and warm, everyone talking over each other, kids running around with pie-sticky faces. Janet hugged me at the door and whispered that she was glad we came. I helped her cut more pie in the kitchen, and she asked gently how my mother was doing. I told her the truth. I didn't know that we were giving each other space. Janet nodded and said space was sometimes the kindest thing families could offer each other. Driving home that night, David asked if I was okay. I thought about it honestly. I was sad that Mom had chosen distance over connection, that she couldn't see how her need for control was pushing us away. But I was also grateful for Emily's laughter over turkey, for Janet's kindness, for David's steady presence. I was learning that family could be more than biology, more than obligation. It could be chosen, built, earned. I told David I was more okay than I'd expected to be. I texted Emily before bed. Thank you for today. She wrote back immediately. Thank you for not letting me back down. We'd both needed each other's strength to do this, to choose ourselves without completely abandoning our mother. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't solve everything. But it was a start. The gates weren't fully open yet, but we were finding our own way through them, together. And somehow, that felt like enough for now. December arrived cold and gray, and with it came the question of Christmas. I'd always loved Christmas as a kid, the way Mom would decorate every surface of our house, how she'd bake cookies for weeks. After Dad died, Christmas became even more important to her, like she was trying to create enough joy to fill the empty space he'd left. Emily and I had gone along with it, understanding that Mom needed the holiday to be perfect. Now I wasn't sure what Christmas would look like. Emily brought it up first, over coffee at a cafe near her apartment. She said Mom had sent her a card with a check inside, no note, just her signature. It felt transactional, cold, like Mom was fulfilling an obligation. Emily had texted thank you, and Mom had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Emily laughed when she told me this, but it was a sad laugh. We both knew Mom wasn't really capable of this kind of distance. She was proving a point, waiting for us to break. I hadn't heard from Mom since before Thanksgiving. Radio silence for nearly 3 weeks, the longest we'd gone without contact in my entire adult life. Part of me felt relieved, like I could finally breathe without monitoring how my choices might affect her mood. But another part felt untethered, anxious, like waiting for a storm I knew was coming. David said I seemed lighter but also more restless. He wasn't wrong. I was sleeping poorly, checking my phone constantly. Emily asked what I wanted to do for Christmas. She and James were thinking about driving up to Vermont, finding a small inn, maybe skiing. It sounded perfect, separate from all the history and expectations. David's family had invited us to their celebration again, which would be easy and warm. But I kept thinking about Mom alone in her house, surrounded by all those decorations, all that forced cheer. I wondered if she'd even bother decorating this year without us there to see it. David suggested we invite Mom to Christmas Eve dinner at our apartment, just the 3 of us. Keep it small and neutral, give her a chance to reconnect without pressure. I appreciated the thought, but I wasn't sure Mom did small and neutral. She did grand gestures and elaborate productions. Still, it seemed worth trying. I texted her Wednesday afternoon. David and I would love to have you for Christmas Eve dinner. Just us. Nothing fancy. 6 p.m.? I hit send before I could overthink it. Mom responded the next morning. I'll check my calendar and let you know. It was such a Mom response, implying she had so many other options she needed to consider. I knew her calendar was probably empty. Emily said I should just let it go, not push for an answer. She was probably right, but the not knowing felt worse than rejection. At least rejection was clear, something I could accept and move on from. This limbo kept me hoping and hurting at the same time. 3 days before Christmas, Mom texted, I can come for dinner. What can I bring? Relief and dread hit me simultaneously. I told her just to bring herself, that David and I would handle the food. She sent back a thumbs up. No warmth, no excitement, just acknowledgement. I showed David and he hugged me, saying it was a good first step. I wanted to believe him, but I also knew one dinner wouldn't fix months of hurt and distance between us. Christmas Eve morning, I cleaned the apartment obsessively. David watched me vacuum the same corner twice and gently took the vacuum from my hands. He reminded me that Mom was coming to see us, not to inspect our housekeeping. But I couldn't help it. Some old instinct kicked in, the need to make everything perfect so Mom wouldn't find something to criticize. David made me sit down with tea and told me to breathe. I tried, but my chest felt tight with anticipation. I'd bought Mom a cashmere scarf, soft and gray, neutral enough that she couldn't read too much into the choice. David had suggested we keep gifts simple this year, not turn it into a competition or obligation. Mom arrived exactly at 6, holding a wrapped package and a bottle of wine. She looked smaller somehow, or maybe I'd just gotten used to not seeing her. She hugged me briefly, stiffly, and handed David the wine. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Dinner was polite and careful. We talked about safe topics, weather, David's work project, a new restaurant that had opened downtown. Mom asked about Emily once, and I said she was good, happy in her new apartment. Mom nodded and changed the subject. I could feel all the unspoken things hanging between us, heavy and awkward. David kept the conversation moving, bless him, asking Mom about her volunteer work and really listening to her answers. She softened slightly when talking about the shelter. After dinner, we moved to the living room for gifts. Mom's package contained a photo album she'd made, pictures from my childhood and teenage years. I flipped through it slowly, seeing myself at various ages, always with either Mom or Emily. Dad appeared in the early photos, his arm around Mom's shoulders, both of them young and happy. I felt my throat get tight. Mom watched me look at it, her expression unreadable. I thanked her, meaning it, even though I wasn't sure what message she was trying to send. Mom opened her gift and ran her fingers over the soft cashmere. She said it was lovely, that gray was practical. Not, I love it, or thank you so much, just practical. I felt the familiar disappointment settle in my chest. David squeezed my knee under the coffee table. Mom asked if Emily was doing anything for Christmas. I said she and James were going to Vermont. Mom's face tightened, and she said that sounded nice for them, in a tone that suggested it didn't sound nice at all. I decided to be direct. I asked Mom how she was really doing, if she was okay. She looked at me with surprise, like she hadn't expected the question. She said she was fine, keeping busy, that she'd learned not to expect much from family anymore. The dig was obvious, painful, exactly what I'd feared. David started to say something, but I touched his arm. I told Mom that wasn't fair, that Emily and I had been trying to build healthier relationships, not abandon her. Mom's expression hardened. She said if we needed space from her so badly, then we were getting what we wanted. I felt my patience start to crack. I told her space wasn't punishment, it was boundary setting, that we still loved her. She stood up abruptly, saying she should go, that this had been a mistake. David stood too, trying to smooth things over, saying we were glad she'd come. Mom collected her coat and purse, moving quickly toward the door. I followed her into the hallway. I asked her to wait, please, to just talk to me honestly for once. She turned, and her eyes were wet. She said I had no idea how hard it was to watch both her daughters pull away, to feel like she'd failed as a mother. Her voice broke on the last word. I felt my own eyes fill. I told her she hadn't failed, that we just needed her to let us be adults, to trust us to make our own choices without controlling everything. Mom wiped her eyes roughly. She said she'd only ever wanted us to be happy, to be safe. I said I knew that, but her way of protecting us had started to feel like imprisonment. The word hung between us, harsh and true. She flinched. I reached for her hand and she let me take it. I told her I wanted her in my life, but it had to be different. She nodded slowly, not agreeing exactly, but acknowledging that she'd heard me. It wasn't resolution, but it was honest. She left without saying much else, and I stood in the doorway watching her walk to her car. David came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist. He asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know, that I'd said things I'd needed to say for years, but it felt terrible anyway. Truth often did. We stood there for a while, the cold air coming in, watching the empty street where Mom's car had been. Something had shifted tonight, opened slightly. I just didn't know yet if it was progress or ending. That night, I texted Emily about the dinner. She called me immediately, wanting all the details. I told her everything, including calling it imprisonment. Emily was quiet for a moment, then said she was proud of me for being honest. She said Mom needed to hear the truth, even if it hurt. I asked if Emily thought Mom would ever really change. Emily said probably not completely, but maybe enough. Maybe that was all we could hope for. Small changes that added up over time. January brought unexpected clarity. Mom called me on New Year's Day, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. She asked if we could meet for lunch, just the two of us. No David, no Emily, just mother and daughter. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for another difficult conversation, but something in her tone was different, less defensive, more genuine. I agreed to meet her at a quiet restaurant near her house. I was curious what she wanted to say. We met on a Tuesday afternoon. Mom was already seated when I arrived, and she'd ordered me coffee the way I liked it. Small gesture, but it registered. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her napkin. After the waitress took our order, Mom said she'd been thinking a lot since Christmas Eve. She said my word, imprisonment, had kept her awake for nights. She'd been angry at first, hurt, but then she'd started to really consider what I'd meant. I listened, holding my coffee cup, waiting. Mom said she'd talked to a therapist. The admission surprised me so much I nearly dropped my cup. She'd gone twice so far, was planning to continue. The therapist had asked her about control, about fear, about what she was really afraid would happen if she let her daughters make their own choices. Mom's eyes filled as she spoke. She said she'd realized she'd been terrified of becoming unnecessary, of not being needed. After Dad died, being needed had been her identity, her purpose. Without it, she didn't know who she was. I felt something soften in my chest. I told her I understood that fear, that I'd never wanted her to feel unnecessary. I just needed her to trust me, to believe I could handle my own life. Mom nodded, tears sliding down her face. She said she was sorry for the wedding, for treating Emily and me like we were competing for her love. She said she knew now that love shouldn't work like that, shouldn't come with rankings or conditions. It was the apology I'd been waiting for. Imperfect, but real. We talked for 2 hours. Mom told me about her sessions, about realizing how much of her behavior came from her own mother, patterns passed down without question. I told her about my struggles with guilt, with feeling like I was never enough. We found common ground in our pain, in the ways we'd both been trying so hard we'd lost sight of connection. It wasn't a fix, wasn't a magic resolution, but it was honest, and honesty felt like the foundation we'd been missing all along. Mom asked about Emily, if I thought she'd be willing to talk. I said I'd ask, but Emily would need to come to it on her own terms. Mom nodded, accepting. She said she understood if Emily needed more time, that she'd wait. The patience in her voice sounded genuine. I promised to mention it to Emily, to let her know Mom was working on things. Mom thanked me, squeezed my hand across the table. Her grip was strong, familiar, but less desperate than before. I told Emily about the lunch that evening. She was skeptical at first, asking if Mom had really changed or just learned new tactics. I understood her doubt. Trust took time to rebuild, especially trust that had been broken repeatedly over years. I told Emily about the therapy, about Mom's tears, about the apology. Emily listened quietly, then said she'd think about it. She wasn't ready yet, and I told her that was completely okay. Everyone's timeline was their own, including hers. David and I had dinner with Mom 2 weeks later. She came to our apartment bearing homemade lasagna. No fanfare, no expectations. The evening was easier than Christmas Eve. Lighter somehow. Mom asked David about his work and actually listened to his answers. She complimented our apartment without mentioning things that needed fixing. When she left, she hugged us both warmly. After she was gone, David said he'd noticed the difference. So had I. Small changes, but they mattered more than grand gestures ever had. Emily met Mom for coffee in early February. She told me about it afterward, said it had been awkward, but not terrible. Mom had apologized to her too, had asked about her life without judgment. Emily said she wasn't ready to go back to how things were before, but maybe they could build something new. Different, smaller, but more honest. I told Emily I was proud of her for giving it a chance. She said she was proud of both of us for not accepting less than we deserved. March brought my birthday, and Mom sent a card with a heartfelt note inside. No check, no strings, just words about loving me and being proud of the woman I'd become. I cried reading it, showed David, then called Mom to thank her. She said she'd meant every word, that she was learning to show love through support instead of control. It was progress, real and measurable. I invited her to a small birthday dinner with David and Emily. She came, and the evening felt almost normal. Emily got promoted at her new job in April. She called me screaming with excitement, and I screamed right back. She'd worked so hard, proved herself in a new city, new company. Mom sent Emily flowers at her office with a note saying, "Congratulations, I'm so proud." Emily texted me a photo, and I could see she was crying. These moments, these small acknowledgments, were rebuilding what had been broken. Not quickly, not perfectly, but genuinely. That mattered more than speed or perfection ever could. By summer, we'd fallen into a new rhythm. Dinner with Mom once a month, all of us together. Phone calls that were brief but warm. Boundaries that were respected mostly. Mom still had moments where she tried to give unsolicited advice or control situations. But she caught herself now. She'd apologize, step back, try again differently. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd imagined as a child, but it was real. Real felt more valuable than imaginary perfection had ever been. David and I celebrated our first anniversary in July. Mom sent us a card with a photo from our wedding, the moment after the ceremony when we'd kissed for the first time as husband and wife. She'd written, "May you always choose each other." Simple words, but they carried weight. She'd witnessed me choosing David over her expectations, and she was blessing it now. Emily and James came over for dinner, and we toasted to new beginnings. All of us had them, in different ways. Emily announced her engagement to James in September. Mom cried, happy tears this time, and asked Emily what she could do to help with planning. Emily said she'd let her know, and I watched my sister set a boundary gently but firmly. Mom accepted it with grace. Later, Emily told me she wanted me as her maid of honor. I said yes immediately, grateful that we'd found our way back to each other. The gates that had separated us were fully open now, and we were choosing to walk through together. At Emily's engagement party, I watched Mom talking to James's parents. She was warm, welcoming, not trying to dominate or control the conversation. David noticed too, squeezed my hand. He said people could change if they wanted to badly enough. I thought about my wedding day, about standing outside those gates, about everything that had happened since. Change hadn't been fast or easy, but it had been possible. That possibility had saved our family, or at least saved what we could rebuild from the pieces. Standing in Emily's apartment surrounded by friends and family, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Mom had her struggles. Emily was still finding her way. David and I were learning marriage day by day. We were all imperfect people trying to love each other better. The gates weren't a barrier anymore. They were just gates, and we'd learned when to open them, when to close them, and most importantly, who we wanted on either side. That night, driving home, David asked me if I ever thought about that day at the wedding. I said I thought about it often, but differently now. It had felt like an ending at the time, like everything was breaking apart. But really it had been a beginning, the beginning of honest conversations, of boundaries, of choosing myself without guilt. The gates had opened for the wrong person that day, but in doing so, they'd taught me who I wanted them to open for. And that lesson, painful as it was, had been worth everything. I texted Emily before bed, "I'm so happy for you." She wrote back, "I'm happy for us. We made it." And we had. Through locked gates and family drama, through hurt and healing, through all of it, we'd made it. Not back to where we started, but forward to somewhere better. The gates behind us were closed now, and ahead of us, new ones were opening. This time, we knew exactly who we were walking through them with, and why. That knowing made all the difference in the world. Tentar novamente.